Be live? Yeah, totally.
Yes.
Okay, I think we're live and and I'm here with the co-founders of the Joy Revolution, Mark Cordone and Melanie Klein. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. I guess it's morning in LA and it's afternoon in New York, so we're kind of morning and afternoon.
Yes, thanks for having us.
I'm so excited to see you guys.
Yeah,
so, the reason we're doing this is because I was a part of the Joy Revolution. Was it over the summer? It was about 6 months ago.
September.
Okay, less than 6 months ago. But I loved the program and I had so much fun and so much like everything, transformation, and it was still fun, but I learned so much. I was going to say pain, but it wasn't really painful. It was just like my own stuff surfacing, which was great because then I could let it go and replace it with joy. So the reason we're here is because I want to share that with everybody because I thought it was so amazing. So since I totally messed it up, can you tell me what the Joy Revolution is in your own words?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, Mark, if you want to start, because this originally was sort of, he had the idea and then we kind of synergized. So I'll hop in after you sort of maybe want to share the personal reason or insight that it kind of came up for you and then sort of what we made it together.
Yeah. Do you like how she's already directing me in the first like 30 seconds of this? Like, Tara, you do the influencer program. So it's like totally, I'm getting tapped here to be like, okay, you talk, Cordone. But I think that when we initially started, we came from a place of community organizers. Mm-hmm. We came from a place of folks who had worked in social justice work. I can just use an I statement here. Like, I was pretty burnt out. I was, while I was doing the work, I saw myself getting more and more angry at times. And so one of the things when it comes to the work that I do as a positive psychology coach is to not only look at how we can grow from the things that we learn from when it comes to anger, but how can we also learn from the things, the moments that we're feeling joy and happiness and ecstasy and those sort of things.
Ooh, ecstasy.
And
that's
ecstasy,
a new word that we throw in
absolutely.
there.
And I think one of the things that we tend to miss is that, when we fall down, everybody's talking about resilience and getting back up, but also those moments where we're completely happy and we're having the best days of our lives are the moments that we can sort of curate, grow from, and look to use those as sort of like leadership and inspiration so that the long term of social change, entrepreneurship, leadership can be one in which you sustain yourself through joy, rather than like being burnt out at the end of your life and having all these regrets. So that was really the beginning of the Joy Revolution for myself, in meeting Mel and sort of getting into this relationship with Mel. Like not only did we realize that we could do this work from the standpoint of, okay, let's tag team and put our minds together, but like, let's laugh the whole way through this. And that's another part of the Joy Revolution is like, can we create social change? And not only with levity, but just having a whole bunch of fun. And for us, that's something that we continue to tap into and we want to share with folks.
Yeah, we actually met on his show, The Golden Mic. And it was interesting. The conversation that we had that day led to us having sort of a post-interview conversation where he had shared with me his own background in academics, working at Emory and, higher education, community organizing, social justice, which I didn't know anything about his background that related to that. So that was sort of a pleasant surprise. And I remember
that was my way of flirting.
Yeah, say social justice. That was a flirting technique for us. And I remember having this really lucid moment. I'll never forget it. I've shared this with him many times where he looked up from the paper and he shared that was his background as well. And I just had this flash of intuition at that moment. I knew that we would be doing something. I don't know if I knew at that point exactly what our relationship would look like, but it was very clear that this was someone I was going to be doing some kind of social justice work with, but I also knew it would look very, very different than anything that I'd done. So that was literally from the moment that I met him. And then when I think our really first long personal conversation, where it was like 3 hours, we got into this conversation about how we had been very committed for 20 plus years, each of us, in doing social justice work and community organizing, but how draining it felt. And also that a lot of the conversations and dialogue within those communities had turned in such a way that it didn't feel as inviting, as invigorating, and as sustainable any longer. And that we both had, around the same time, made the conscious decision to step out of the ways in which we had been doing that work for a very long time, and we're looking to do it differently. And probably within a week of that conversation is when Mark came to me and said, hey, what about doing this? And it just kind of snowballed immediately, and we got going, and we put the program together to merge our backgrounds, his in positive psych, mine in sociology, feminism, mindfulness, with sort of, looking at how we can increase joy capacity, and what does that do in the way of allowing us to show up as leaders, parents, role models, entrepreneurs in a new way, and in a way that is going to be sustainable, is going to, Mark always talks about joy as a contagion, to really draw people in who maybe wouldn't be drawn into this kind of work, and do it in such a way that there is going to be sort of an increased impact over time. And that was incredibly appealing to me, because I didn't want to move away from the work, but I wanted to do it in such a way that instead of creating more divisiveness, and even, I would say in a lot of ways, having divisiveness within groups, that there was just much more connection. And joy is such a wonderful way to connect.
Yeah.
And I want to point out, it's not about spiritual bypassing. It's not about denial or hiding and being in this really sort of one note experience of joy either. It's really about tapping into the fullness of our life with a new frequency. And I talk about that when I talk about embodied work, like how we can actually be it, live it, share it. And that includes all of the aspects of our experience, which is why when you said about the stuff that came up for you, it's like, yeah, let's look at that and let's transmute that and let's use it as fuel. My work had always been about empowerment. And I found in doing this with him and having him share positive psych, that it's like, oh, this is actually about empowerment as well. It's just another inroad for our empowerment. And after 20 plus years of being so heady, so academic, I was really looking to tap into other parts of my being that had gone stale, and tapping into joy capacity allowed me to do that. So we want to share it with as many people as possible so that we can create long-term sustainable change across, all communities. That was a really long answer. Do you regret asking that question?
No, I loved it. I love that you mentioned something getting feedback. So you mentioned my joy revolution, and I want to touch a little bit on what drew me to your program. Mark and I were friends before, and then when I met Melanie, I was like, oh my gosh, we've been friends forever, and I just met you. But I feel like but before that, I had a bunch of mentors who had been very successful in business. And when I led with the impact that I wanted to make in business, I had people say, well, that's nice. And if you want to go do that, then start a nonprofit. But if you want to have a real business, then you need to focus more on making money. And obviously, we all need to make money doing what we're doing. But this was the first time I had heard people talking about how you can make an impact doing what you love doing and aligning everything with your purpose. So your career, your passion, your joy, the things that make you excited about waking up every morning, and bringing in mindfulness and creating an impact that spreads like a contagion, to use Mark's word, to everybody that you come into contact with. And that was so in alignment with what I want to do with my business and what I am doing, that I knew I had to be a part of this. So that was kind of my result, was just finding a community of people who want to create this impact and also spread joy and stop the suffering. And a lot of it is self-inflicted, which I think a lot of us learned during the program, that we have control over a lot more than even what we think we do. And I believed in that beforehand. I was like, I need to focus on what I have control over. But then after the Joy Revolution, I was like, oh my gosh, I have control over so much more things. Not to sound like a control freak, but
you have choices. You have choices.
Like, I am empowered now to do more and change more and not be afraid of change. So what are some of the other results that people get from embarking on a Joy Revolution?
One thing I'll say is, you talked about the mindfulness and you talked about how you realized you had more choices than you even understood prior to that. And for me, that is something that becomes clear to folks when they are able to create enough space to become present in the moment of what's actually happening, to become present in that moment of truth. And I find that joy is oftentimes a great training vehicle for people, because when we are in joy, we are so incredibly present, right? And time moves so quickly. And so in terms of mindfulness practices and techniques to allow us to become more present and more clear on the choices that we want to make, I think joy is a great way to practice coming into the moment more and more. For me, it's a wonderful way to train our minds and our beings to come to that place where we have the space and expansiveness to make those choices. The other thing that I found, and that was even including you as we went through the process of writing about your own Joy Revolution, is that folks really began to have a greater understanding of what their own authentic and unique experience and feeling of joy was. And there were so many liberatory moments that I saw for individuals in that. There was almost a recognition of their core authentic self that maybe had been forgotten or had gotten lost. And so that was something really beautiful that I saw. And through that, I just found that each person just became a bigger, more expansive version of themselves, and their messaging changed. The way that they showed up changed. The way that they, really took care of themselves changed, and they were able to accomplish more, whether that was in business, whether that was in, playfulness, self-care, that there was the opportunity for more, and that more was less draining and less overwhelming.
Yeah, I think to take that even further, the two main results that we're looking for every person is number one, what is the personal development that you're ready to go on, right? So what does joy look like to you? What does satisfaction with life look like to you? What does ending your life, which seems tragic, but is not, but what does ending your life from the standpoint of living one with no regrets look like for you? Because now you can bring it into the present. Because if you're like, I know what a life with no regrets looks like, well, then we can create one now, starting now. And then going from personal development to societal change, right? Because so many times we're like, well, it makes me happy to do this, but in order to be happy, I have to totally disavow myself from all the things that I want to see changing in society, or I have to disavow myself from wanting to get paid. I have to disavow myself from all these other aspects of life, when they can all come together brilliantly when you first take care of your own shit, right? When you first go into the personal development piece of things. So I think that's the two main things. And I love how you started that question off, Tara, with what is your own joy revolution? Because it's not us to come in and spoon feed everybody what their own joy revolution is. Most people, and people, I would say, watching your Be Live right now, you know what you're passionate about. But in many ways, there's so many, like what we talked about in the Joy Revolution, there's so many invisible things that make us think that we can't achieve what our passion is, that we stuff it down, or we think that we can't do it in a way that is sustainable. And so I think that's the biggest thing about the Joy Revolution, is coming out of it feeling empowered, feeling like you have a story, feeling like it makes sense, feeling like there's congruency with imposter to influencer and all the other programs people might be doing. So everything is enhanced when you're living life in joy and integrity with what it is that you're living.
You know, and I love Mark really pointed out the piece about the personal and the social, is that, you know, the results are going to vary for individuals. There's some common, you know, through lines, some of that I know that I mentioned that were maybe a little more esoteric or broad, but what that looks like for people in terms of empowerment, or what it looks like in terms of sustainability, what it looks and feels like in terms of fill in the blank, is going to be different for everyone. And so ultimately, we're looking for the experience of being in the program to result in some sort of personal change, some sort of personal transformation, which then can be used to, you know, serve in a new way, whether that's clients, family, their community, their students, whatever it happens to be. And then the third piece is having the actual skill set to understand how to build a movement, which is different than branding, right? And so you can take, you know, I always talk about the personal liberation for, you know, the collective good. So we can do that, but it's very difficult to have your personal liberation affect the collective good on a grand scale if you're not familiar with movement building or, you know, community organizing. So that's why it made sense for us to kind of put together, you know, the individual pieces, the inner work with the outer work, and then the practical skills that Mark and I have had for on the ground community building and organizing over the last 20 plus years in the realm of social justice. And you know, all together, we want people to leave and create their own paradigm shift in their own communities, and at the same time, feel renewed and invigorated and empowered on the personal level.
Amazing. And one of the things that I love that you said was, or what I was getting from it was, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? And that's really what we're talking about, is when you change your inner world or your inner environment, your outer world, whether it be your relationships, your business, your life, your purpose, your joy, that changes. But it starts with you. And we think that it comes from something outside of us sometimes, that we need to buy more things, get promoted at work, be in a happy relationship, and then we'll be happy. Yeah. And so it's a lot of chasing. And what the Joy Revolution does is it brings it back to that empowerment piece and having it start from within you. And since the Joy Revolution, I've started a PR agency, which is kind of funny because everyone who I've told is like, weren't you already doing that?
I know. It was the biggest non-shocker when you told me. I was like,
I know. I was like, I'm so excited. I have this big announcement. And you're like, what? I thought you already did that.
Yeah, no, it made so much sense. Absolutely.
And so when I did that, now I work with thought leaders and authors who are also spreading that message and creating that impact. And I feel like that seed was planted in the Joy Revolution, that was possible, or even that I was already doing it and didn't know it, since nobody was surprised.
Yes.
But just taking that piece of branding that is not branding, what you mentioned, Melanie, that it's a movement rather than a brand, and that it's already happening. You already have the movement inside of you, and people already see it. And it's about stepping into that and maximizing your opportunity to move that movement forward.
Yeah.
And I love that. That's a great point. And I want to sort of also add that some people who come into or who did our beta or who are signed up for our January cohort that's starting soon, some of them have done already a lot of inner work and aren't sure how to translate that into the outer work.
Yes.
And so, some people may start from that place and we move outwards. Other people are doing outer work, but don't really have the inner landscape in such a place that the outer work is going to be operating at maximum capacity or is going to be the most efficient. So people who, it doesn't matter where a person's starting point is, like what we're looking to do is then create that element of equilibrium, bring them into balance and have both the inner and the outer, right, really matching and aligning and becoming as large as possible. So just want to throw that out there for anyone who's thinking about maybe inquiring or who wants to email us. It's, again, if you are someone who's done a ton of growth work, there is still so much more to discover, as well as being able to take that growth work and really manifesting that in the external world. And then for people who've done a lot of the work and like, hey, I'm already, playing this role in the community, or I've already been doing fill in the blank, is really asking the question, well, what can that look like if you start to do that much work, or if you start to go that deep in the inner landscape?
That's such a great point, because I came into it with like 6 coaching certifications.
You did.
And I was like, I have a PhD in coaching from my School of Life and Self-Development, but I still learned things that I had never heard before. And I was like blown away every single time we got on Zoom. And I had so many ideas. I felt so inspired. So even with coming into it with that background and being in this community for the last 3 years with coaching and personal development, I still was like, it's speechless.
Well, I think that's one of the things that is one of the biggest illusions of life, right? Like we come in thinking that we need to acquire more and more and more and more knowledge. And that's something that, coming from an academic background, that I've needed to kind of work with my own coaches on and work with my own development on, is that it's not really acquiring more knowledge. And sometimes when we go into these programs, there's an unlearning that needs to happen. When we first talked, we almost wanted to frame the Joy Revolution as a university in which you come in and you unlearn some of the bullshit that you pick up in your life.
It's like the unschooling movement.
It's like, the unschooling movement, like disorientation instead of new student orientation, right? So like, I'm really glad that you got something out of it. And then also at the same time, Tara, when folks are beginning to have these blossoming moments, it automatically impacts the group. And so like, I remember like getting off of our calls and just as facilitator or educator, or whatever you want to call me, like I'd turn to Mel and I'd be like, dude, this is changing the way that I'm looking at the world. Yes, I call her dude when we get off of these calls. What's up, dude? Right? That's also a flirting technique, everybody. Dude, call your women's studies like specialist.
Only if they're a fan of the Big Lebowski and you can take dude as a compliment, and we'll just leave it at that for all the Big Lebowski fans. But I mean that's exactly right. Is that there's always something new to discover. There's always something new to find. And, let's face it, there are so many different programs that people can take. It's a matter of really tapping into, well, what is the one that's going to approach this information in a way that's fresh enough and new enough that I'm going to be able to hear it and not have it just go by. I mean, part of the experience is the writing process that we talked about, of writing your own story, which I work with every participant. And we all know that when you read your own words enough times, you can't even catch typos, you can't catch details, right? So oftentimes when information is presented in the same way, we really filter out most of it. And so I think that the approach in the Joy Revolution is fresh enough and is, new enough that even folks who've done a lot of work will be able to catch something new and, hear something a new way, experience it in a new way, apply it in a new way. And I think that, for individuals who have done this work, they know that if you get one or two really core things out of a program, that the value right there is beyond what you've invested, because it will absolutely change every aspect of your life.
And you mentioned writing, Melanie, and I have to go back to the first time that you and Mark met was actually through something that you had written.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So share that story.
Sure. So Mark, the first time we had our in-person visit, he was taking all of his books out of his backpack that he had on the plane. And I saw the cover of this one thin book and I was like, oh, that looks really familiar. Went by it. And then the next day I looked at it and it said the Journal of Popular Culture. And I said out loud to him, I said, who travels and reads an academic journal? That guy, right? And he said, well, tell him what you said.
Well, number one, the Journal of Popular Culture it's been my number one reading tool and educating tool over the past couple of years. Not only because of the fact that it's nerdy, but also because of the fact that we can learn so much by what's on TV and around us. So
we do a lot of pop culture research together.
So yeah, we do a lot of Nacho Libre was definitely one of the pop culture research this weekend.
We watched it 3 times in 4 days, and then now we've binged out on The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel too. So
yes, so there's going to be some new references. But when I was in my PhD program, that's when I started reading on the Journal of Pop Culture, and probably my favorite article was about. I don't know if y'all watching remember, but if you went to the store and got these what
they were in gumball machines.
In gumball machines, right? You put in a quarter, you turn the crank, and outside there's these plastic balls, and inside the balls are
they're called homies.
They were called homies.
They were little cholo characters.
Yeah, they're cholos and DJs and gangsters and rappers and stuff, and my buddies and I would collect them. And it turns out
Me too.
that one of my favorite articles was called Chillin' with the Homies.
Down with the Homies.
Oh, Down with the Homies, right? And it turns out that Melanie had written it.
Well, and that's the thing. I said, who reads the Journal of Popular Culture? He's like, oh, I do. It's one of my favorites. I have all the back issues. I'm like, and I just stood there and I went, you know that I'm published in that, right? He said, what? He said, which article did you write? And I said, Down with the Homies. He went, oh my God. He said, aside from the wrestling articles, that was my favorite, most memorable one. And I remember thinking, oh, that's so odd. So 14 years ago, before we ever met, he had my article, in his dorm room or whatever in college. And what I think is so great about that story is just from the get-go, there was so much alignment in us doing this work. Not only do we, nerd out on the academic conversations and theory, and we nerd out on social justice, I mean, truly. But what was so great in the first conversation that we had when we were talking about social justice work is that it was the first person I'd ever met where I could go between spirituality, social justice, growth mindset, theory, pop culture, all seamlessly. And to be quite honest, it's a really great picture of actually what happens in the Joy Revolution as we move back and forth between those domains. And, to be a little corny, at times Mark would say, we were made for each other. And it's true.
Wait, you're calling me out for being to be a little corny. And then she's like, Mark would say this.
You did, but I'm corny too.
Yeah.
But it's true. Awesome. We watched our Golden Mike together. Okay. The first one that we did, but I just share it because I know it sounds corny to people, but I think we both felt that way in our work and what we're doing, what we're creating. It just made sense to do all of it.
Well, and I think to just jump in and one final point to that is how many times in our lives do we have so many solutions just sitting on the shelf Melanie was in my life for 14 years. And I never reached out and just said, hey, I think that your article is the coolest article I've ever read.
I know you could have done that,
yeah,
right?
I could have totally done that.
I never even thought about that either.
I could have totally done that and I didn't, And so how many people watching or how many people right now that are just living their life and just putting people in the background, or how many people that we've interacted with, they're like, oh, that was a really cool person, but we could have followed up. And you never know like what kind of partnership, what kind of like a collaboration, what kind of coaching situation you could have set up with this other person. And so that's another thing about the Joy Revolution, is that it really challenges you to be like, okay, wake up today, and what are the things that are running in the background that are just screaming at you to bring them into the foreground and make them a part of your life. And I don't think that it's any surprise that the Joy Revolution impacted me as one of the founders of the program to like change my other programs that I was doing, just because after those programs it made more sense to integrate some of the things that I saw other people integrating, and seeing them bring things to the forefront like you did, Tara, like it's amazing. And so it just completely was awesome.
I want to say one more thing about that. I know we both get very wordy, so just we get into it. But you had made the point that someone had said to you about, hey, if you really want to create a business, focus on making money, blah, blah, blah. And through this experience, your amazing PR agency came to manifest, and the language that you used in your copy changed, and what you were talking about and sharing on social media changed. And just want to present the idea that I know people talk about, but to hone in on, we actually become much more effective, and we create a greater impact, and we can draw in more abundance of love, of resources, of support when we are in joy. Joy oftentimes is seen as sort of a light topic that's really not important to tackle when it comes to serious things like business or serious things like social justice. But actually, all of those things are drastically enhanced when we bring in the frequency, the experience, the feeling of joy in an authentic and fully embodied and well-rounded way. And so it's not something light, it's actually a huge enhancement. And that's something that we're trying to become, make very clear to people, that joy is sort of the new success, if you will. So kind of like orange is the new black, or whatever it happens to be in that season. Joy can be a new measure of success. It can be a new barometer of empowerment.
It's so true. I don't know how many people I've talked to who are like, I hit the top of my career path and I wasn't happy. And that was me too. I think I was 26 years old and I was like, I'm not doing this for the next 40 years. So what are your top 3 tips for how people can have a bigger impact in their careers or businesses? Maybe it's 3 unlearnings or 3 ways that they can bring more joy into their lives, and then that will affect their businesses.
Yeah, well, I think number 1 is that we can think about life as inputs and outputs, right? And so in terms of inputs, the things that we experience on a daily basis that we think affect us, right? Like it's raining outside today, right? And Tara, I've heard you say like, your story about carrying around the umbrella and getting rained on, right? That's an input, right? So for example, like you might be out of cereal, you might be out of milk, and then like all these inputs get to us, and then we're all pissed off at the end of the day. We can't control our inputs, but we can control our output, which means our reaction to the way that those inputs affect us. I can't change the weather yet. My magical powers are getting stronger, but I can't change the weather yet. But I can change the way that I react to it, right? I can't change the times that people provoke me and say, you're all you do is talk about happiness all the time, and you're empty, blah, 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 blah. I can't control that, but I can control the way that I react to that. Okay, I can learn something from that.
So tip number 1 is?
Tip number 1 is understand the difference between your inputs and your outputs, and understand that the things that you can control are your outputs, the way that you react, the way that you proactively address life. Your choices are your outputs, and you have 100% control over those outputs. And hopefully that's very empowering for some people, because they think that they're affected by inputs and they can't control their outputs. So that's tip number 1. Tip number 2 is, once you understand the difference between your inputs and your outputs, understand that like a lot of people nowadays are like, when it comes to growth, I have to always feel pain. I have to always feel pain. I have to always feel pain. Well, that's one motto for I have to always feel pain. I have to always. I'm gonna repeat it until 10 o'clock.
Which, by the way, used to be my mantra and my experience for real. So yeah, that really speaks to me. Yeah.
And I mean, if we look at, I mean, even the songs that are on the radio, if we look at the things that are on TV, the mantras that people are throwing out, no pain, no gain, right?
Yeah. But like marketing to pain points and all of that.
Yes, exactly. So is there a way that we can actually have the ecstasy of growth without those pain, without having to experience those pain points? Yes, there is. So while we will experience pain points and growth from those pain points, on the other end, think about the best day of your life. Think about the most joyous moments and what you learned from those moments. Those are called post-ecstatic growth moments because we have the moment of ecstasy. We have growth as a result of it. So the growth that I had from meeting Melanie is, hey, I can chill out. I don't have to have so much control over my family. I don't need to like wake up at 6 a.m. and like do all these regimented things and be upset about all the inputs that are happening to me. So being able to be in this partnership with her has really let me understand that I can be in ecstasy and be happy and continue to grow, right? So that's the second point. The second point is understanding that growth can happen on a continuum of trauma and joy. So regardless of where you're at today, it can be a day where, like on my Golden Mike show, you're at a 1 in terms of your happiness today, or you're at a 10. Understand where you are, but then understand that you can grow regardless of where you're at on that continuum.
I don't think I'm just laughing because I'm like, I don't think anybody expected that when they were going to get 3 tips, that they were going to get 3 lectures.
Shit.
Which I love because it just shows how passionate and excited Mark is about positive psych. He loves this shit, like loves it. And I love that he's sharing it like that. But let's make the third one a little shorter. So yeah.
She's squeezing my neck right now.
No, I'm rubbing it.
Can I make a suggestion?
It's so good. It's so good. And just for those who are like excited about it, but maybe it still sounds a little vague, like these are some of the things that we cover much more in depth in the curriculum. And you can email us, but give us the third. Give us the third.
One of the things you did actually, Mark, in the first one, you said, I can't change the weather. And then you corrected yourself and you said, yet. And I think adding yet to the end of any sentence where you start with I can't is so powerful. Because it means that there's hope that you can make a difference later.
That optimism is part of what comes out of tapping into joy. And we were doing a podcast yesterday, and there's a beautiful quote by Helen Keller where she talks about the importance of optimism and faith, and that is what can carry us through some of those really painful moments or challenging moments. And it's something that's really essential. And what I have noticed a lot is sometimes in a lot of the paradigm shifting work and the community work that is going on, sometimes people lose sight of the hope and the optimism, and that's part of the joy. Mark always talks about, oh God, I totally just had a brain thing. I can't think of it, but somehow when you connect that, I don't know, I just lost it. But yeah, the optimism and faith is really important for us to have to move forward.
Yeah, I'm trying to shut the hell up right now. So
I love Alex. Oh, I know what it was. When he talks about positive psych, he talks about this being the other end of psychology, where as opposed to looking at what are the maladies, what are the problems, what's going wrong, positive psych is looking at what is actually going right. And so that's why I brought that up. Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that you never have a bad day anymore, right?
No.
So maybe
I think that can be the last tip then to throw in, is that
tip 3.
When it comes to joy, like joy is not necessarily about like always having great days.
Or what about Taco Tuesdays every day?
Dude, you're taking my lines away right now. Like being happy 24/7, that Pollyanna type of happiness. Joy is really sort of aligned with things like emotional intelligence, where you're looking at like really great days and then maybe more challenging days, and then learning from every single one of those days. So we call it more along the lines of joy capacity. So the more and more you can do those ups and those downs and be resilient and cope and bring those in and integrate them, you're looking at your joy capacity increasing. Bigger the joy capacity gets, the more impact you have on society. There.
Yes.
So good.
And I didn't punch the table like I did in all those other Joy Revolution. Like in the actual Joy Revolution, my fist was bruised because I punched the table.
He gets very excited. It's very, very infectious. It's awesome. I love it. I do.
So I hope those make sense.
It does make sense. So let's bring it back to what people can do to their internal world to start manifesting more in their external world. And it might take 14 years, like Melanie was sitting on Mark's shelf for 14 years before he met her.
Literally.
I know. So it doesn't happen overnight all the time, but it's the sum of the little things that we do every day. So what is one thing someone can start doing consistently to show up for themselves?
I'm going to let you take one and I'm going to offer one because we usually have slightly different answers, which is great. I mean, that's what the wonderful thing I think about creating this program together is people get both of us. So we have that wonderful overlap in our work and our perspective, and then we both interpret and offer something different. So just to be fair, my one thing is I feel like people can pause. If we can pause and take a moment, take a breath, to really sink into ourselves, to listen, to tune in. Oftentimes, a lot of the answers that we need are waiting for us on the inner shelf, if you will. And so it's just taking the pause, finding those moments, however brief, and like you said, they're cumulative, how they can add up to really start to explore who we are, what we need, what we feel, start tapping into when do we feel joy? What does that look like? How much of it do we have? How much can we increase it? So it can really relate to a range of experiences and benefits, but all of it comes back to the pause, coming back to that stillness and coming back to listening.
Yeah, and I think this is a good time where we can show our contrast too, like that we're on the same page and that we also can give different type of tips.
Yeah.
Like my tip
I
is
know your tip.
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 My tip is the idea of just of straight up acting. So like on the other end, like I'm a person who over pauses. I think too much.
Ooh,
and when I
good.
over pause, I don't act. And so with so many people who might be like, well, I've been doing the pause work. I've been doing all these things and I'm not moving.
Didn't you pause for a long time?
I don't pause, but that's a thing is that like
you used to.
I used to.
I was going to say, like, this
overpause.
is like Action Jack here. So
Yeah. I mean, it used to take 7 years for me to make a decision about something. And now it would take 2 days to make a decision now. So like, just take the action, because in so many ways, like my pause had to do with what was going on in my head and not listening to my heart and my gut. For people who are pausing too much, what is your heart, what is your gut saying about things?
Yep.
So just stop overthinking, stop overanalyzing, and just do.
I don't want to tap in. They actually go together.
I know.
Because for me, it's
They're
not
totally
it's not
integrated.
about pausing to think more, which is a very, like Mark said, he's very heady and academic
Very.
and all those things.
Very heady, very academic.
The pause for me is when I say drop into yourself, is dropping into your body, dropping into what you're feeling, what you are experiencing, the way of sensation, what bubbles up authentically without searching for it, without grasping for it, without, one of my clients would say, I was racking my brain. I was like, that's the first problem right there. But going into the embodied experience, coming into the fullness of yourself, which is mind, body, spirit, pausing, tuning in, and then whatever surfaces, taking action on that. And that process alone will absolutely change everything for a person.
Yeah.
I absolutely love seeing the two of you living exactly what you're talking about, because so much of conflict and these negative emotions and polarizing ideas come from us saying the exact same thing and using different words. And the two of you just talked about the same tip from two different perspectives, and you spoke to different people, but it was the exact same advice. And I think that's so beautiful to bring it back together and to close on that connection point where when we want to connect, we find a way
Yes.
to understand each other.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And I'm going to add one thing. The point of connection when we talk about joy, we can actually come into really our basic human needs and desires. And the connection for us is, can we use this as a way to not just speak to the same people or preach to the choir, but how can this allow us to connect over those bridges that often divide us?
Yeah, and then just to throw the same thing out there, when I was,
you can't stop us. When I
was doing multicultural work, it's the same thing that we're doing in the Joy Revolution right now. And it doesn't matter the wording that you use, but one of the things that always has stuck with me that we've kind of brought up is this idea of living in moments of joy that are infectious, and you can just sit down and you can be like, oh, we're kind of saying the same thing, or are we contrasting? It's all different words, right? And so we're trying to practice controversy with civility.
Yes, that's a good
and
point.
to really bring people together, that's one of the big things that needs to happen is to be able to not live in safe spaces, but not live in dissonant spaces, but live in spaces in which there is controversy with civility, and to be able to live in joy, to be curious about other people. It's a different type of happiness, but also at the same time, when you bring it all together, your internal, your external come together. The words don't really matter as much because you actually can see you can make those bridges between people. And when it comes to social change, entrepreneurship, that's a skill that everybody needs to grow on.
It's so true. And we are three of the wordiest people I know. We're probably not on Twitter.
That's why I stopped using it. But anyway.
So I'm going to have to cut us off because we were supposed to do this for 30 minutes and it's been almost an hour. But I love you guys, and I'm so happy that you were able to join me. So one last question, and I think the answer is pretty short. How can people find you or get more information about the Joy Revolution?
Very simply, you can go to info@thejoyrevolution.org. info@thejoyrevolution.org.
Oh, I put com. Oops, when I sent it to her, but oh well.
Okay, so we can buy that domain real quick.
Okay.
Or you can say thejoyrevolution.org, because that one's up and running.
Okay.
And you can hit us up about that.
Or also Mark or Melanie at thejoyrevolution.org.
Yeah.
You could email us.
Okay, here we go. I'm fixing it.
Thank you.
Yes.
Amazing. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'm sure I'll talk to you soon. Thank you for sharing everything that you shared about the Joy Revolution and your story. I absolutely loved hearing it over and over again.
Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.
Bye.